Welcome back to another UAP Roundup. I'm going to be sharing with you my highlights from a variety of podcasts, YouTube videos, stories, current events that have been happening in the UAP, UFO, and related fields. This one's going to be collecting from about the last 3.5 weeks. On the menu today, UFO disclosure updates and insights, the secret space program hypothesis, whales and alien communication, human brain hybrids, mainstream cosmology proved wrong, Terrence Howard and hidden frequencies, Mars mysteries, Billy Carson and forbidden knowledge, and forbidden archaeology. First up, I want to discuss how Congress is handling the UFO issue. It's February, 2 months into 2024. The reduced UAP bill passed, and what's Congress doing now? Well, first, let's watch a couple of recent interviews with some of the Congress members who have been leading the UFO investigation, which some refer to as the UAP caucus. So this is Anna Paulina Luna and Tim Burchett, both Congress members. Let's take a listen.
Effort, and when I got into Congress, it's very hard to find a true believer that believes in it for the right reasons, wants to genuinely, I think, bring the truth out there and expose it to the American people. He's one of them, so don't ever doubt that. So much so that, he's ruffled a few feathers up here and people have kind of put him in their sights. So make sure that you back him, if you know what I mean. I think it's time, based on our last session that we had with members of oversight, and what we were able to conclude is that we've brought in credible witnesses. They were telling the truth, and so it's time to move on to the next location.
So that's kind of an update. They do want to have more hearings. They do want to keep pursuing this seriously. It is serious. Here is another representative, Robert Garcia. This is an interview that happened right after he walked out of the skiff that happened last month, where Inspector General of Intelligence Thomas Monheim met with a group of Congress people to brief them about the UFO issue and about the information that David Grush, the top secret classified information that David Grush provided to him. So this is him getting interviewed. Let's take a listen.
Obviously, we can't talk about the details of the briefing, but I think there was some interesting information, and so I think that this is a topic that I think is a national security issue, and it's really important that there's disclosure and transparency. I think that's what the public wants. I think it's also a very serious topic, and so we've got to just take it with seriousness. It is not a joke.
But one member used the term that what they were exploring here were, her phrase, interdimensional beings. Is that something that we're dealing with here potentially?
I mean, I think it's easy to be disappointed when you don't get all the information that you want, which I understand. I would have loved to receive much more information, but I think it's reasonable to say that everyone that was in the room received probably new information. I certainly did, and this is a serious topic, and it deserves serious attention. And I actually encourage also members of the media to continue covering this topic. I think that's really important. It is not a fringe topic. It is a serious national security topic.
I like what Robert Garcia said there. This is a serious topic. You heard it from deadpan congressman. This is not a fringe topic. I think that's good. Something I've thought about in my first bullet point is here, are they taking it seriously enough? I don't know. Paulina Luna, in that first interview, it seemed a little bit like she was saying, it's hard to find a believer out here. Raised a little bit of a flag to me, because it's like, all right, it's not about being a UFO believer or not. It's about, this is a documented, authentic issue and what's being done about it. In my second point here, this should be the biggest issue in Congress when you really think about it. It's just monumental, trying to uncover what's behind this. When will these next hearings be? Hopefully we're going to get that soon. There's been some talk about the Schumer amendment being reworked or revamped, but I haven't seen any official word yet on that. And in my last point here, supposedly there's supposed to be a bipartisan letter being sent to the executive branch. In the bottom left there, you see the picture of Representative Krishnamurti. He was quoted in an article as saying he wanted to head this letter to the executive branch, to the president, to do something and take further action on the UFO issue. So we'll see if any of that plays out. Now, Tim Burchett also a couple of weeks ago, interestingly, appeared on the podcast UFO channel. He had some interesting things to say, and this was a really cool video. I encourage you to go watch it. He only interviews him for about 30 minutes, but Burchett really lets his guard down, really opens up about what it's like behind the scenes. So it's an interesting perspective. Here's some highlights. He talks about Lou Elizondo having this 23-minute video that would really kind of move the needle, and hopefully that's coming out this year, is what he said. Here's a quote from him. 100% RO is a disinformation campaign. He spoke about how he gets a lot of disinformation calls to him. He spoke about this one incident where these 4 mysterious people had spoken to his representatives, and they wanted to have a meeting with him, but they didn't want to go to the Capitol building. So they came to his house. They were showing him some videos of these interdimensional entities, and Burchett basically said it was just above his pay grade, is how he expresses it. He just couldn't comprehend it. So he just wants to get to the bottom of what's going on with this. He doesn't really want to speculate too much on how it all works. In the next point, he does say that he thinks he's going to get canned from the UAP investigation. Hopefully not. He talks, very interesting, he talks about how someone high up called him and said, "You really kicked a hornet's nest at the Pentagon, and you better get some bodies around you." So that's a real interesting behind the scenes thing to hear. What, if there's nothing to this, why would he get a call like that? What nest is he kicking? Why are they trying to keep it secret? And in the last point here, interesting that he noted how he's heard that the Department of Energy has this involvement with the UFO cover-up. He's heard that multiple times now, and I've seen that pop up myself. So I don't know. You don't hear as much about the Department of Energy. You might hear about CIA or this and that. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Some more quotes from Tim. He says, quote, "Some information is going to leak out about where these objects and materials are located, and I'll leave it at that." Very interesting. My issue with this whole idea, though, is once it comes out where this is, if these secret groups are keeping this secret so tight, and they have such an advanced level of using this stuff and covering it up, what's going to stop them from just moving it before an investigator shows up knocking on the door? There's got to be a smarter way of working around that. In the second point here, Martin says, "Have you seen information that you can't talk about that is extremely compelling?" And Burchett says, "Yes." And in the last point, he says, quote, "They want to shut us down. We've rattled a lot of big cages." So really interesting. I encourage you to go listen to that. Another piece on Burchett that came up recently that's interesting is he was doing an interview, and he basically said this quote, "Someone who's getting close to the real truth, they'll discredit them. Other people, they'll let them go down the rabbit hole." And what people are talking, and Burchett basically said in this interview, someone with a big following that's really well known in the UFO field is being used as a disinformation agent. Burchett says that. And people are starting to talk about who was he talking about. And it seems like people are arguing that it might be Jeremy Corbell, with other people arguing it might be Stephen Greer. And I don't know if there's been other ones, but I've seen a couple threads where people have been arguing, is it Corbell or Greer? Now, if you've seen my past video, I break down why I think it's very possible that Jeremy Corbell is a disinformation agent, either unknowingly or knowingly. I definitely encourage you to watch that. It really presents some strong evidence that that may be the case. This is why I think if it's one or the other, Burchett is probably talking about Jeremy Corbell, because Burchett, in other interviews, if you've listened, he has made comments that makes it clear that he believes the technology is already figured out and that they're suppressing it from the world because of oil and all that. He's said that multiple times. That's Greer's narrative. So if Burchett believes in that, then that would lead us to believe that Burchett doesn't think that Greer is the disinformation agent, where you've got Corbell saying publicly many times, oh, we haven't gotten anywhere with the reverse engineering, and showing these jellyfish videos and this and that. So I think if I had to put my money on it, I'd say that Burchett was talking about Corbell, or maybe just someone totally else. I don't think it's Greer, though. This is an interesting piece here. This is from Discovery UK, which is pretty mainstream, so it's interesting to see what they cover and kind of take it through that lens. This video was showing evidence of a flying triangle UFO and advanced energy weapons that were being tested at Dugway Proving Grounds. And this researcher was threatened to keep quiet by men in suits. Let's have a look at the clips here.
Well, we were on this railroad track one night, and we seen a triangular craft coming from the south part toward us along the mountain range here. It was a triangle. It was fairly big, black in color, really low to the ground, and it took off so quickly that we didn't have any time to get pictures or video of it. We all witnessed it, and it was gone.
And what about speed or maneuvering?
Totally unconventional. It was almost hovering, then it took off. At one point, I did get a visit from some very intimidating looking people, and they had told me a post that I made was illegal, and they wanted it removed from the website immediately because you could be charged with treason. And he was asking me actually who gave him the information. And I said, so I'm not gonna tell you that. So I had actually got contacted by two people that worked at Dugway about a week later, and there's a huge investigation going on to try to figure out who gave you that information.
Witnesses across the country have been reporting black triangle sightings since the 1980s.
So pretty interesting, a big mainstream outlet putting out this story that there's these black triangles near military bases that are flying like UFOs, and then people are visiting the witness and threatening them. So interesting.
Okay, so it happened directly over that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, right where that peak is, it's directly over it.
There's a whole lot more sightings out here that can not be explained as conventional technology.
So yeah, I just think it's interesting to keep up on these bigger outlets and how they're covering it, because it can be telling about what kind of truths maybe will come out, what kind of things will be disclosed. Clearly there are sightings of things happening at these military bases. The big question, one of the big questions in the UFO subject now, has always been, but even more so now, is how far have humans gotten in reverse engineering the technology? And what have they done with it? What are they doing with it? And so one of the theories about this is the secret space program theory. That's the idea that since the 1940s and 1950s, certain groups, certain elements of individuals working together, working in the military, working through private industry, working through government, but a small, secret, powerful group, a cabal, has basically hijacked this and has successfully reverse engineered the technology since the 50s and has been able to use it, has been able to take it outside of Earth orbit. And it's been going on for 70, 80 years. And many witnesses testifying to this, evidence, circumstantial evidence to suggest that this is the case. And that's the difference between disclosure being, hey, yes, we found craft, we found bodies, but we really don't know how to do anything with it, versus what could be the truth, the secret space program hypothesis, theory. So in this section, I want to take a look at some new information regarding that. Perhaps the most well-known author on the secret space program topic is Michael Salla, and he recently put out a video with an update from someone who he says is an insider informant from the Army named JP. And so Michael Salla, there's some credibility issues with him. Some of his claims are very hard to believe. He did work with Corey Goode for a number of years, and Corey Goode is a complicated case, but the short of it is that he said he was in a secret space program, solar warden with the Navy, going to the moon base, doing all this crazy stuff, and then years later he came out and said he made it all up. It really tarnishes the credibility of people like that, these secret space program insiders, and that's kind of who Michael Salla works with and continues to with this person named JP. Now on the other side, Michael Salla, he is a PhD. He was a professor at American University, big U.S. college. So, he does have some credentials. He's just not some random dude. And he is still well respected in the UFO community. I've read 3 or 4 of his books, and he actually presents a lot of good documented evidence and makes some very interesting connections and arguments. So he definitely has a value. And if you haven't checked out his books and his information, I think it's really worth it. But you just have to be really discerning, in my opinion. It's interesting and valuable to take in. Still possible, could be the truth. Some of these things, these insider testimonies, it could really be true or even partially true. We can't rule it out. So anyway, he had this video recently with JP, who's supposed to be this Army insider. And JP says that he witnessed this Nordic group of extraterrestrials using this human body transforming technology. So basically some type of technology that made them go from how they look into looking like a human. And the purpose of doing this, he says, is to share information and, quote, they can't show themselves yet. So interesting. We have heard, even in like the TMZ mainstream documentary with those speakers, this is a common thread. They're walking among us. They're already among us and we can't even tell. So it seems like there's a good possibility that that's true. If it were to happen, maybe this is actually something that someone witnessed. Again, it's hard to believe it, but it's possible. To the 4th point, another thing they mentioned is that at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Conference, which is some kind of conference that Michael Salla and others participate in, JP and Michael Salla actually met 2 of these ETs, which would be crazy if that was really going on. So I encourage you to check it out, listen for yourself. And my last bullet point here is just, this is what I think. It's either this small window into this whole alternate reality, right, where maybe there really is this one witness who's cleared to talk about it on this one channel. Michael Salla is like a pretty big channel. He's probably the biggest ufologist into the secret space program theory. And if it's really going on, maybe it's a leak, drip, drip. That's what JP says the point is. And hey, if we get that confirmation that ETs are here, then stories like this, again, they're more believable. But for now, it's hard to believe. This is either like a tight window into that world, or it's just a genius money-making scheme where Michael Salla finds people to be secret space program witnesses, and they kind of just do this, and there's really no penalty for it. Maybe they've figured out the legal end of it. I don't know. But I do know in Michael Salla's books, he does put real information and documents out there. And even if it's partial truth, I think you can add it into your understanding this topic on a deeper level. Perhaps the best secret space program witness that we have right now is Michael Herrera. And I say secret space program because he witnessed humans using UFO technology and has testified to other things he's found out about UFO technology, saying in previous interviews that the contact that he went and visited one of these bases with told him the UFOs themselves are the most boring thing. There's so much else going on. So he's like kind of our best secret space program witness right now. And he hasn't done many interviews, but he did make an interesting appearance on the Cosmic Road YouTube channel, which is it's a good channel. It stays very much updated on the day-to-day of what's going on. But it's a relatively small channel, like 8,000 subscribers. So I think it's an interesting appearance for him. And some of the takeaways from this that was different from his other interviews is he tells his backstory of how he met Dr. Greer. He talks about these psionic assets, the P3 assets, as he calls them, which are psychic, people with a psychic ability. And that's what's needed to operate the UFOs. But the other part he clarified in this interview was interesting in that they actually use these psychic assets to communicate with the ET and lure the UFOs close enough to the base so that then they can shoot them down. And they are successful doing this about 2 or 3 times a year. Crazy, right? Just crazy if it's true. I mean, he's putting himself out there. They're supposed to show him more of this operation sometime soon. And he reiterates that he's cooperated with the Senate Intelligence Committee, and multiple people whose names are well known in government. I've talked about this in previous videos. He's gone to the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's gone through all the official channels and has said this. He's not just saying this out on YouTube. He's gone and really sworn it to the government and the officials who can do anything about it. The last point here, which again, of course, just complicates everything. Nothing is so clear-cut. In the interview, he mentions he's a 32nd degree Freemason, which, it always raises the hair a little bit. I understand that people say it's just 99% of the Freemasons have no idea what really the network is in the top with like Illuminati and all that stuff. But it did just make me think. I don't know if it's such a puzzle. It's such a conundrum. It's like, is this guy being 100% honest? I want to believe him, and it's fascinating that he's gone through all the official channels with this story, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know. What could there be another agenda? Richard Dolan actually weighed in on the secret space program recently. He was on the New Thinking Aloud podcast, and I like Dolan's take on it because he's not ruled it out. He's open-minded to it. He says, quote, "Yes, there is a powerful argument for an ET-related secret space program. Quote, we have an abundance of credible testimony that the U.S. has been doing its best to replicate whatever ET tech it can to have its own capabilities in Earth orbit and potentially beyond." And in the last point, he calls it a breakaway civilization with their own, quote, understanding of the greater reality that's off limits to us. So he entertains this idea, which is really crucial because he's one of those mainstream ufologists who gets asked to be on documentaries and this and that. So his opinion, his rhetoric plays a role. And the fact that he's entertaining that and saying we should be taking that seriously is really important. It's a good sign that, or a chance that we're not just going to get a limited hangout disclosure, as it's called, where they just say, yeah, they exist, but we don't know anything about them. So it's cool to hear him speak about it, and that podcast is interesting to check out on the New Thinking Aloud podcast. Another ufologist who has researched into crash retrievals and the potential of a secret space program is Ryan Wood, who just recently made his return to the field of ufology. He's the son of Dr. Robert Wood, who you may know about, you may not. He was a scientist that did a lot of research into UFOs from the 50s, 60s onward. He was involved in the Condon Committee and all that, and they tried to actually fire him for having scientific evidence that the UFOs were real. Anyway, Ryan came out with some new books, and he has 103 UFO crash retrieval reports updated in his new book, Magic Eyes Only. He's has a lot of knowledge about the Majestic 12 documents. That's what him and his dad are known for working on in their website. He also has a new book called The AI Ufologist. So all very interesting stuff. And Ryan actually was nice enough to speak with me on the podcast. So going to be releasing that episode next week. And we just have a lot of good questions for Ryan. And it's a very interesting interview. I noticed this when I went to go buy Ryan's book, is it's #1 in new releases for the category of folklore and mythology. I just found that fascinating. Here we are, we have a official whistleblower saying crash retrievals have been going on. The government's taking it seriously, passing bills, legislation, hearings, and a book about evidence for UFO crash retrievals gets categorized as folklore and mythology. Fascinating. Here we have Oreos maybe trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit with space and UFO-themed Oreos. Also, there was a couple of Super Bowl commercials the other night that were very interesting, and I actually just did a video 2 days ago analyzing that. I definitely recommend to check that out. Obviously, if you know what's been going on in the last year with the UFO subject, this is very significant at probably the biggest television event of the year. This was directed by Martin Scorsese. Now we'll look at some recent scientific findings that are starting to give us clues of science fiction becoming reality. They had the first successful experiment of humans communicating with whales. Let's listen to the update from Anton Petrov, who does kind of keeps people updated on these new scientific findings.
Each other. I mean, we don't really know what the message means, but the important part in this case is that this was the first such communication between humans and humpback whales, but in this case using their own language. Not something we train them to do, not something that mimics English, for example, using humpbackanese for the lack of better words. And so even though in terms of actual communication not a lot of information was exchanged, the important part here was the conversational style. There was a clear understanding between the whale and the researchers. And for SETI researchers, this is a really important discovery, because whales' behavior potentially mimics how we might one day communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence if it exists.
So pretty interesting, learning how to communicate with whales and trying to figure out how we might communicate with ETs. He says at the end there, if they exist. Well, it seems like it's probably the case that we've known they've existed for a long time and we have communicated with them for a long time. So it's interesting to think SETI's spending all this money when it's probably a lot more is known about it. And also this whale theme continues to go. I've seen reports in the last year of UFOs being seen over whales. They're doing this. In the James Cameron Avatar film, the last one that came out, they were communicating with the whales. So, whenever there's a pattern like that, it just makes me think. In other news, the brain is crazy when you think about it. What they've found is that AI, they're finding that the computing power of AI is limited by the physical hardware, and actually brain tissue and how the human brain works is more efficient because it only takes the energy of a light bulb for our brain to run. So that's the direction that the mad scientists seem to be going, is figuring out how to make brains that could be like a supercomputer brain. I encourage you to check out this video, which is where I got the information from, of these real studies and real things and projects being done by groups. So let's just watch a clip of this here.
The brain, in terms of how fast the brain is in processing information, and in terms of how much information it can store inside of it at all times, there's just no computer on the planet that's ever going to be as successful as the human brain. And so because of this, some scientists decided to take a slightly different approach and start working with physical cells instead, with this process being much simpler and usually much more efficient. Here, the scientists rely on stem cells in order to produce a variety of different neuronal cells.
So there you have it. They're using stem cells to start to figure out how can we combine computers and human brain tissue and make these superhuman computer brains. Crazy to think about, and definitely something to be cautious about, in my opinion. In our last scientific finding that's significant, it's basically disproving what have been our leading models of cosmology and theories about astrophysics. The new study changes our understanding of the universe, and it has to do with dark energy, right? And if you don't know what dark energy and dark matter is, it's a name that's been given to what scientists, what astronomers and astrophysicists have looked out into space and said, as much as, 95, they used to say, now it's down to like 75 or 65% of the universe is this invisible dark matter energy that we have no idea what it is. And we can't measure it or perceive it at all. So what this found out here was pretty interesting. Basically, the leading theory has always been the universe is expanding from the Big Bang, and it'll just expand forever, and eventually this energy will be too far out that everything will just die. But this new study actually proves that that's wrong, and that likely it expands out and then contracts in, and expands out and then contracts in. Let's check out here the takeaways about this new dark energy study.
And one, it basically means that the universe is not going to be continuously expanding. It's at some point going to slow down and potentially even start shrinking again. And if it shrinks more and more, it might even reach the state known as the Big Crunch. Basically, it goes back into a tiny point and maybe starts over again with another Big Bang. Although here we don't really have enough details about what's really going to happen, and once again confirms that the modern models of the universe are definitely incomplete.
So again, to me it's significant because it proves that we don't know a lot. And all these people who are these leading astrophysicists, they talk as if we understand exactly how it all works. And here you are, new studies coming out showing it's totally wrong. and we need new models of understanding it. So very interesting. Speaking of needing new models to understand our universe and our reality, I came across this Terrence Howard video, who apparently he's been studying this hidden frequencies for 45 years. If you don't know Terrence Howard, he's a popular actor, Hollywood actor, and this is a little older. I understand this probably came out some months ago, but somebody recently did like a highlight clips and analysis a week or two ago, and that's the video that I watched about this, and it was fascinating to me, very different. He basically is making this argument that math is based on 2 dimensions, and we live in a reality that's more than 2 dimensions, so math has to adapt to that. And he says in the second bullet point, he wants an audit on the way we do math. He talks about something called harmonic wave resequencing. And in the fourth bullet point, this was super interesting. He's saying that the human body is naturally tuned to 432 hertz. That's a frequency. And what happened in popular music is they shifted the standard tuning to 440 hertz, which is out of sync with the human body. And some people have debated, would that make that much of a difference? But the argument against that is like, hey, if you play guitar and that one of those strings is slightly out of tune, the whole thing is just off. It just doesn't feel harmonic. So some people are debating if that would make a difference or not. The fact is, though, that the music is tuned off of what would be our natural body's natural resonance. And my question is that intentional? Was that done on purpose to keep us, in a state of not, our highest vibrating frequency? Maybe it's just what happened. I don't know. And my last point here is just thinking about this in terms of when celebrities speak out. I always find it interesting I think it's great when celebrities do this because they have such a power being like put up on this pedestal. If half of them would talk about some real stuff and just help people start to question and realize that we're not getting the full truth about what the world is and things are being intentionally kept from us, that might help. So props to Terrence Howard for doing that. And I know the downside of that is then you get written off as a crazy, or even Hollywood. There's people that talk about Hollywood will just end your career. So respect for Terrence Howard for coming out and pushing this. He clearly knows what he's talking about, and we can watch a couple clips here now so you can get a feel for it. I encourage you to watch the whole video, though.
But they were misled by something I think called a straight line. You believe there's straight lines in the universe? Well, let me hit you with something. All energy in the universe is expressed in what? It's in motion. If something is still, there's no energy. Kinetic, right? All motion is expressed in what? You look at galaxies. Are they expressed in straight lines? Expressed in vortices. All vortices are expressed in what? Waves. All waves are curved. Show me a straight line in nature. You show me where the platonic solids come from. Where do they have their foundations in our universe? Are there any straight lines? If you look at anything, there are no straight lines. That's been the mistake. We've been looking at these straight lines, this Euclidean way of thinking, and missing the curvature of nature. So here we are, back with the curvature of nature. And you have all these.
It's an interesting thing to think about. I never quite pondered it that way. No straight lines in nature. In our world that we manufacture, it's our math and all this very much based on this linear straight line model. So it really makes you think.
All of these things. Now they've said that all the in-between spaces, if this is the Earth and this is the moon right here, all this in-between space is filled with what? A void. There's nothing in the void. Well, I found that there is something in the void. The elementary fundamental particles that they've been searching for at the CERN collider, the Hadron Collider in CERN, I found that their energy signatures matched perfectly to some of the pieces that I was able to pull out of here. They
definitely piqued my interest. Check it out here, Mount. I want to actually listen to more of it. It kind of just got me interested. I don't fully understand what he's saying or arguing. In other news, we recently just got supposedly the first full color accurate picture of Mars. That's supposed to be Mars there. Fascinating, right? First real picture of Mars planet captured in true color for the first time ever. That was just about a month ago. Apparently that's water. Apparently the blue there is water, and that would be crazy. And I don't know, is this some type of softly disclosing it so that when people start to go colonize Mars, is this like step one, looking at it and seeing, oh yeah, you could actually live there? I don't know, but that's pretty fascinating to stare at. I could just keep looking at that. Wild. Speaking of Mars, this is Joe McMoneagle, and he was remote viewer number 1 of the Army's remote viewing program, and he recently did a 5-hour life story podcast on Sean Ryan's show, and one of the clips that came out was that he remote viewed Mars 2 million or 200 million, I don't remember exactly, it was one of those, years ago. And he saw pyramids, he saw structures. Of course, we know Richard Hoagland's research into the pyramids on Mars. That's a fascinating topic. Gone down that rabbit hole, read those books. There were clearly structures on Mars in the photos. This is something I hope will come out in the relatively near future. It's just fascinating, like structures on Mars. Speaking of 5-hour podcasts, Eric Hecker, who is a whistleblower that worked for Raytheon in Antarctica, and he's come out and basically said there's some sketchy stuff going on down there. There's a lot more to his story. He claims he was recruited for a remote viewing study as a child, that some of his work early on as a plumber, he was kind of having brushes with these Illuminati type figures, like Council on Foreign Relations type people, and he talks about that. So there was a lot of interesting information there. Antarctica, just like Mars, is a whole nother rabbit hole, you may know. So more to come on that. Speaking of rabbit holes and long podcasts and the Sean Ryan Show, Billy Carson has recently been making some rounds on podcasts. The Danny Jones and Sean Ryan appearances in the last 2 weeks already has 1.3 million views. So it's significant, I think, because he's putting a lot of ideas and notions out there and claiming certain information to be true to a lot of listeners and a lot of people in influential spaces of the so-called conspiracy world or the alternative reality, or, you know, you could really just call it critical thinking world would be a more accurate term, I think. And Billy's an interesting one. I appreciate him, but I also have some issues with him. And as I say here, he's a visionary, but he's unreliable. For example, in this interview with Sean Ryan, he talks about Admiral Byrd and Antarctica. And he states, I won't get into the details of it here, but he states something that is 100% was a made-up quote from Admiral Byrd. It was inaccurate from the actual original quote. And he says it as if it's fact, with full confidence. So that stuck out to me because Admiral Byrd and the Antarctica and the hollow earth theory, inner earth hypothesis, that's actually an area that I've gone down a rabbit hole on, have a ton of research on that, and he claims several total fake information, which shows me he didn't really actually verify what he says are facts. And if he does it about the Admiral Byrd to Antarctica, it's like he could do it about anything. So to my point here, can't take his word on anything, have to fact check everything, and it's often misleading. Even if certain things he says are true, it's often not the full picture. Nevertheless, like I said, I do think he's a visionary, thinking of these really out there connections and putting in the time into the research and opening up avenues of inquiry. It's just like you can't trust anything he says. You have to check everything, which is a lot of extra work. But regardless, here are some highlights from this 3-hour, from like 5 hours of him talking here between the Danny Jones and Sean Ryan show. Space is the next rush for superwealth. Disclosure is a ploy to legalize the black budget. Ancient stone computers, how Nikola Tesla was inspired by ancient Egypt. I've never seen those claims before. That would be pretty interesting if he was, because after all, Tesla is the guy who figured out electricity and made our world modern through his discoveries. And if he really did figure it out by studying ancient Egypt and the pyramids, then, that's not insignificant. That should be looked into more. The pyramids, in his view, were a hydrogen communication device, which is fascinating. Apparently, according to him, again, you'd have to go fact check it. Apparently, right now, the way that signals and communication are sent out to space is through hydrogen. And he says the pyramid and the way with the water, the Nile running through it and everything, it was using hydrogen to communicate to other star systems about what was going on Earth. Fascinating to think about. And certainly if that's what hydrogen's used for now, it's reasonable to think that maybe that's possible. He goes on to talk about mind links and this whole concept of the research being done to transfer consciousness. And apparently there was this experiment at the Brain Institute with the video game where one guy was in the room with a device on, the other guy was in the other room with a device on, and the guy played the video game through his device. Some crazy. He talks about in 2010 that they successfully transferred a monkey's consciousness into a computer. I mean, I've never heard that. If that's true, that's just wild. And another one, 2016-17, they transferred a human's consciousness into a robot. Has anyone heard of this? Is this really true? Like, it's crazy to me. I haven't gone and checked that. That's wild if it's true. He also refers to the DARPA Avatar project, same idea that they've figured out or are in the process of figuring out how to have like real life avatars, like the movie. Then he goes on to talk about sound and cymatic frequencies and this idea that cymatic sound frequencies and photons, light photons, can create matter, and that's how the pyramids were built. And that apparently some UK scientists have actually confirmed this, that cymatic frequencies and photons can create matter, which is pretty interesting. And this whole thread about like sound and the energy from sound frequencies being able to do all kinds of stuff and move huge stones, there's something to that. It's very interesting. Something to keep open to, I believe. And again, CERN, in the big CERN particle collider that we hear being talked about again and again, Billy believes that they might be trying to make a wormhole there. And part of his reason for that is apparently outside of the CERN laboratory, there is a painting of an Indian god walking through a portal. And if that's true, again, I wouldn't be able to take his word for it. I have to go look it up. That's pretty fascinating. Like, why outside of a particle collider are you putting up a picture of an Indian god walking through a portal if you're not maybe trying to make one? I don't know. I don't know. Another wild claim, again, if it's true, it's wild. NASA apparently has discovered something called X points, which are naturally occurring wormholes. And apparently they've even figured out that they create direct pathways between planets. I mean, if that's true, I mean, that's pretty clear to me that like there's some type of travel system set up there to get between planets through wormholes, but I don't know if any of that's true. He says that the Brain Institute has confirmed that there's 11 dimensions of the mind. I would be very curious to see what that is and what that means. There's a 30-meter opening in Antarctica that can be seen on Google Maps. Ed Dames, who was another military remote viewer, told him that beings, quote, come and go at will in Antarctica. The Nazi bell, which was an experimental device that's known, as official history, the Nazis were experimenting on. He says that was being used for time travel. Billy claims that there's better soil and circadian rhythms on Mars. In the old Sumerian tablets, the working class of gods that were called the Ajiji, and the Sumerian origin myth, which actually states this, says that humans were created to replace them as laborers, but he actually says they were mainly being used to send over for labor on Mars. I haven't heard that interpretation before. 400 million year old artifacts that could be found on Earth but are actually not from Earth, are from another planet that collided with Earth called Tiamat. The ancient Sumerian god Enlil was actually Zeus, and that the name Jesus meant Hail Zeus. I don't know. I haven't heard that. Haven't looked into it. Another twist on mummification. We're all taught in school that the bodies in Egypt were mummified for the afterlife, but Billy says they were actually mummifying them for a regeneration process. And they had all their things with them there, their coveted goods and gold, so that when they regenerated, it would all be there for them. It's kind of a cool way of looking at it. Again, I don't know what kind of substantiation there is for that. And then another thing, NASA owns the rights to the inside of the pyramids. He says that like it's a fact. Is that true? Again, I haven't researched any of this, but if that's true, like that's wild. Why would NASA own the inside of the pyramids? So it's always fun to listen to Billy. Again, he can really open up new pathways for thinking, but you have to do the hard work of checking everything. and you can't rely on the claims being substantiated. So, Billy, if you're out there, when you're saying things that are speculation or not confirmed, just be clear about it, because otherwise it's like people are just going to think all these wild things, and some of them are just not true. And there are real mysteries. There are real secrets. There's definitely a lot being hidden from us. But I feel like if you're going to talk and you have such a huge audience, man, like millions of people are tuning into you, and we should be developing as good, accurate, critical thinking population, not just any conspiracy, I'm going to jump on it and believe it. So, and it's important to cite the sources, and it's important to be accurate and delineate between speculation, rumor, and like actual verified data. Going from Billy Carson and forbidden knowledge to forbidden archaeology, Michael Cremo has been popping up in the last couple of weeks in a few different podcasts, and he wrote a book some years ago called Forbidden Archaeology. It's a huge book. It's over 1,000 pages, and he puts forward evidence of humans being on Earth millions of years ago. And of course, our leading model now is that modern humans as we know them were really only here about 300,000 years ago. When he made his book, his findings were suppressed. He says that the book has conclusive evidence, like empirical evidence, that humans were here millions of years ago. And he said actually a mainstream media outlet picked up his work and did a little story on it. And he said after that went out, the mainstream scientists and archaeologists were furious. And he received like a lot of heat for that. I want to read his book. That would be pretty crazy if we have hard evidence that just disproves our whole theory of human origins. He had an interesting perspective also on the ancient Indian Vedic texts. And he says, just like a lot of times we just look at the Sumerian and the Mesopotamian, Enki, Enlil, and the Anunnaki and all that in terms of, is in these old myths, were they actually speaking of real things happening with potential non-human beings integrating or manipulating human evolution in some way? And he says that actually in the Vedas, there's just as much, if not more, information about that story and what was going on. My wife saw this pop up on one of her social media feeds, and she showed it to me, and I was like, wow, you know, I never thought about it like that. Of course, you probably seen the big obelisks in Egypt, and what if the pyramids are just these huge, the top of these huge underground obelisks that like connect down into chambers into Earth? I've never heard anybody in the conspiracy alternative world talk about this. Maybe there's no evidence for this, but really cool to think about and just to pique the imagination. A couple upcoming projects that I have: China's Secret Psychics, 1979 to 1990. I have a research paper out on my website, but I'm going to be boiling that down into a video. Really fascinating topic. The Philadelphia experiment, I found myself going down a rabbit hole there. That's a old ufology tale that in 1943, this Navy ship actually teleported by accident when they were doing some kind of experiments. And most people have written it off as a hoax, but when I started to go down the paper trail, I actually thought it was just worth investigating. And so I'm going to be giving my takeaways on that. I also have on the docket the David Grush on Joe Rogan podcast. I know that was a couple months ago, but I think it's really significant. It's a 3-hour podcast. He opens up more than he has anywhere else, and there's a lot of interesting points he makes that you can really read between the lines and really get a bigger picture on what the heck's going on with all this. Thank you again for watching. Let me know if you have any thoughts or ideas about any of this information, and I'll see you in the next one.